Okay, let's set the scene. It's 1866. And when we think of Fyodor Dostoevsky now, we think of this literary giant.
The profound genius, yeah.
Exactly. But at this moment, he's a 45-year-old walking disaster. He's an epileptic. He's a massive gambling addict. And he is just financially wiped out.
Completely. He's pacing his room with a 25,000 ruble debt hanging over him.
And just to put that number in perspective for you?
I mean, it's an astronomical sum. It was something like 50 years' salary for a skilled civil servant. He wasn't just broke. He was basically legally finished.
And this wasn't just some abstract debt. It was written into this predatory contract with a publisher named Dostoevsky.
A man often called a literary vulture.
Yeah.
And that's not an exaggeration.
So what were the terms?
The terms were just draconian. Dostoevsky had to deliver a completely new novel by November 1st of that year.
And if he missed the deadline?
If he was late by a single day, he forfeited the rights to everything he had ever written or would write for the next 9 years.
That's a professional death sentence.
It's indentured servitude. And right into this, this impossible situation, our hero walks in.
A 20-year-old stenographer, Anna Snitkina. She's hired as this last-ditch effort.
A Hail Mary, really.
And her first impression of the great Dostoevsky. Not exactly romantic.
Oh, not at all. She said he was gloomily harsh, irritable, couldn't remember her name. He was so paranoid, he even made this weird comment about her being a woman.
What did he say?
Something like, "It's good you're not a man. A man would probably start drinking. You won't, will you?"
Wow, okay. So this deep dive is built around Anna's reminiscences. And you have to understand, this memoir isn't just a diary.
No, it's a very carefully constructed countermyth. It's her defense of Dostoevsky's legacy. Our mission today is to show how this young woman didn't just save his career, she stabilized his mind, and really, she invented a whole new business model for literature in Russia.
So, part 1, the 26-day race to write The Gambler, a book about his own addiction, which he has to finish in less than a month.
The logistics are just mind-boggling. Anna was the best student from her stenography class. This was like cutting-edge tech at the time.
Right.
They worked from noon to 4 p.m. every day.
Yeah.
Dostoevsky would pace around the room, smoking, acting out the scenes.
Literally performing the novel as he dictated it.
And then, when he was done for the day, her work was just beginning.
She'd go home and transcribe all that shorthand into a clean manuscript.
All night. She'd work until dawn, so he'd have fresh pages the next day. It was just total, all-consuming dedication.
But scholars now say this process did more than just speed things up. It actually changed his writing.
It fundamentally altered it. You can feel it when you read The Gambler. It has this frantic, breathless quality.
A velocity to it, yeah.
That's the walking rhythm. He was physically performing the text, and that energy got embedded right into the prose. This right here is the laboratory where his famous polyphonic novel was born.
Explain that. How does walking and talking lead to polyphony?
Well, a polyphonic novel has all these independent voices, right? Characters with their own distinct worldviews that aren't just puppets for the author.
Okay.
By physically acting out these different characters for Anna, his immediate audience, he was giving each voice its own rhythm, its own life, before it even hit the page. She was the sounding board for the voices in his head.
So they finished the book in 26 days. A miracle. But the publisher, Dostoevsky, has one last dirty trick to play.
Of course he does. He knew Dostoevsky was up against the clock. So on November 1st, the final day, he just closes his office.
He skips town.
Exactly. He makes it physically impossible to deliver the manuscript. So he can claim Dostoevsky defaulted.
And Dostoevsky is, I imagine, panicking. But Anna, this 20-year-old, she has the answer.
She's just so practical. She comes from a world of bureaucracy and rules, something totally alien to Dostoevsky. Her advice was simple, brilliant.
What was it?
She said, take the manuscript to the local police station and get an officially time-stamped receipt, proof that you tried to deliver it.
That is it's a stunningly modern legal maneuver.
And it worked. It completely defeated Dostoevsky and saved the rights to his entire life's work, including Crime and Punishment, which had just come out.
And just a few days after this high-stakes legal drama, we get the marriage proposal.
The famous metafictional proposal. It's so telling.
He doesn't just ask her. He tells her he's thinking about a new novel.
About an old painter. A clear stand-in for himself. Older, sick, full of scars. And this painter falls in love with a young woman named Anya.
He lays out the whole scenario, all the painter's self-doubt, and then he turns to her and asks,
is this psychologically plausible? What would you answer?
He couldn't even risk rejection in the real world. He needed a fictional buffer. It's heartbreakingly fragile.
But Anna cuts right through it all. Her response is so direct.
I would answer that I love you and I will love you forever.
No games, just compassion. And that really becomes the foundation for everything that follows.
And what follows immediately is the furnace. 4 years of exile in Europe, from 1867 to 71, supposedly a honeymoon.
It was anything but. They were fleeing creditors, yes, but also his.
Yeah.
His very demanding family. But abroad, things got so much worse.
Because his gambling addiction just exploded.
Completely. In places like Baden-Baden, it became this relentless, devastating cycle.
Anna describes it in her memoir. He'd lose everything, come back to her weeping, suicidal, and then beg her for more money.
And she'd have to pawn her own clothes, her jewelry, even her coat, just to keep a roof over their heads. She was literally trapped in their rooms.
And this is where we see her genius for psychological management. She could have scolded him, shamed him.
But she realized that would just trigger his guilt, which would lead to anxiety and then probably an epileptic seizure. It was physically dangerous for him.
So she made a choice.
A radical choice. She decided to, in her words, divorce his gambling mania from his moral personality.
She treated it like a disease, not a character flaw.
Exactly. And by refusing to be his judge, she became his anchor, the one stable point in the chaos. And that's what eventually allowed him to break the addiction in 1871.
And during this exile, she's also the eyewitness to these huge intellectual battles, like the fight with Turgenev.
Oh, the legendary quarrel in Baden-Baden. Turgenev, the great westernizer, is going on about Russian backwardness. Says he considers himself a German.
And Dostoevsky's response, which Anna carefully records.
Is this just classic epic burn? He tells Turgenev he should buy a telescope to see Russia, because he's clearly too far away to understand it.
And she made sure that story got told. It was a key piece of cultural warfare.
She was always documenting the raw material for his art. Take their visit to Basel to see that Holbein painting.
The body of the dead Christ in the tomb.
It's a brutal, hyper-realistic painting of a decaying corpse, not a beautiful, serene Jesus.
And it had a devastating impression on him. Anna says he stood there, stunned, and she was afraid he was about to have a seizure.
And then he says the line she never forgot. From such a picture, one might lose one's faith.
A line that appears, word for word, in his novel The Idiot.
Exactly. She was the archivist of his soul, in a way. She saw where the art came from.
It even happened with their own personal tragedies.
When their first baby, Sophia, died at 3 months old, it was devastating. And Dostoevsky tried to comfort Anna by telling her their daughter was now an angel of God.
Those exact words
Are later put into the mouth of the wise elder Zosima in the Brothers Karamazov. Her grief, his words of comfort, it all became part of his final masterpiece.
So in 1871, they finally come back to Russia, still in debt. But now, Anna takes charge.
She learned her lesson from the Stolovsky disaster. She decides they will never again be at the mercy of publishers. She was going to seize the means of production.
She becomes his publisher, one of the first major female publishers in Russia.
And she approaches it like a forensic accountant. I mean, she went all in.
What does she do?
Everything. She dealt directly with paper wholesalers. She navigated the censors. And this is my favorite part. She would go undercover into bookstores pretending to be a customer.
No way.
To figure out their distribution margins and credit terms so they wouldn't get ripped off. She learned the whole business from the inside out, incognito.
That is just brilliant. And the results?
Transformative.
Yeah.
The first book they self-published, Demons, sold 3,000 copies. It generated 4,000 rubles in net profit.
Wait, 4,000 rubles net from one book?
Yep. Compare that to the 3,000 Stolovsky offered for his entire catalog for 9 years.
It's a total reversal of fortune.
It was everything. They were out of debt by 1878. He was finally free from being a literary proletariat, as he called it. Anna herself says this financial stability is what made a book as huge and complex as the Brothers Karamazov possible. She bought him the time to be a genius.
And she also had to become the family gatekeeper, right? Protecting him from, well, his own family.
Oh, absolutely. She saw his stepson Pasha and his late brother's family as basically parasites who preyed on his generosity. Moving them out to the country to Staraya Russa, that was a strategic retreat. For his health, for his work, and for their finances.
She was always thinking long-term, even after he died.
Decades out. In the 1890s, she negotiated a huge deal for a complete works edition. It secured the family's future, even though she kind of regretted that it flooded the market with cheap copies, which hurt sales of her own higher quality editions.
The peak of all her work, the validation, comes in Moscow in 1880.
The Pushkin speech. It was a national event, People were weeping in the audience, strangers were hugging him. He was declared a prophet for Russia.
And Anna wasn't even there.
No, she was back home managing the business, but she saved every letter he sent her from Moscow. And in one of them is that incredible line, "Anya, I have conquered."
For her, that must have been everything.
It was the justification for every pawned coat, every sleepless night.
But her work wasn't done, even after he died in 1881. The reminiscences were written for a very specific reason.
A posthumous betrayal from his supposed friend, Nikolai Strakov.
What did he do?
He wrote a private letter to Tolstoy, of all people, calling Dostoevsky vicious, envious, and depraved. And he hinted at dark sexual crimes, linking him to his character Stavrogin from Demons.
A total character assassination from someone in the inner circle.
Yes. And Anna's memoir is her definitive answer to Strakov. It's her final act of defense.
And her argument is that Strakov was just being too literal.
Exactly. She says he was confusing the artist's ability to imagine and empathize with sin for a confession of sin itself. And then she delivers the final word, the testimony that shapes all Dostoevsky's scholarship after her.
He was the kindest, the gentlest, the wisest, and most generous of all the men I have ever known.
She spent the next 37 years as a widow curating that legacy. 7 editions of his works, establishing the Dostoevsky Museum.
And then the tragic irony of her own end.
It's just heartbreaking. The woman who managed millions of rubles died in 1918 during the revolution from malaria and starvation in Yalta. She died in abject poverty.
And she wasn't even buried next to him until 1968.
A century after his death, it took that long to reunite them.
So when you boil it all down, she played these 4 absolutely crucial roles.
First, legal and administrative. She saved him from the Stolovsky contract.
Second, creative. She introduced the stenography that created the conditions for his polyphonic style.
Third, psychological. Her radical compassion was the key to managing his addiction and epilepsy.
And fourth, economic. She pioneered a publishing model that gave him the freedom to write his masterpiece.
The genius gave us the words, absolutely, but the stenographer built the entire structure that allowed those words to exist.
It's an incredible story of collaboration.
It is. We'd love to celebrate the idea of the lone, suffering genius, but this deep dive really shows how much collaboration is required for survival, let alone success. And that brings up a question for you, the listener. We see how Anna's business savvy enabled a masterpiece like Karamazov. So what contemporary works of genius are being structurally enabled right now, and maybe even subtly shaped by the unsung professionals behind the scenes? The editors, the agents, the business managers, the emotional anchors, whose names we will probably never know.